An ordinary traffic stop turned into something no one expected. Watch until the end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support more stories. The morning air in Richmond carried the brittle chill of late autumn, the kind of cold that clung to lungs and left a faint trace of frost on car windows. The neighborhood was immaculate. Lawns clipped to uniform precision, driveways lined with imported cars, and stately sycamores arching above the road like guardians of privilege. It was not the kind of place where people expected to see a 72-year-old black woman behind the wheel of an old Lincoln. Viola Martin drove slowly, deliberately. Her wide-brimmed hat shaded the salt and pepper curls at her temples, and her burgundy wool coat fit her figure with elegance. She wasn't in a rush. These streets had always held a certain beauty, the way the morning light fell through the trees, the way the houses looked as if they had been lifted from magazines. She let herself appreciate it for just a moment, until flashing blue and red lights pierced her rearview mirror. The cruiser behind her accelerated. She felt her shoulders stiffen. A hollow drumbeat rose in her chest, not fear, but a deep, weary recognition. She pulled to the curb. The hiss of a lawn sprinkler whispered behind a hedge, and the neighborhood's silence seemed to pause with her. The officer approached with heavy boots. His nameplate read T. Becker, though Viola didn't need it to recognize the type. His hand rested on his holster, fingers curled just enough to suggest authority, not restraint. He didn't smile, didn't greet her. His voice cut like cold iron. "License and registration, ma'am." The words struck with the force of a command, not a request. Viola adjusted her glasses slowly, meeting his eyes without a flinch. The leather of her gloves creaked as she reached into her handbag. Every movement was measured, practiced. This was not her first stop, not her first test. "Is there a reason I'm being pulled over, officer?" she asked, her tone calm, deliberate. Becker's jaw twitched. "You were driving suspiciously, circling. This is a high-income neighborhood, and we don't often see your car here." "Suspiciously?" Viola echoed softly. "I slowed down to admire the sycamores. Is that now a crime?" He ignored her. His gaze swept the interior of the Lincoln, lingering on the back seat where a hardcover book lay open, its pages worn and creased. He stepped closer. "Step out of the vehicle." Viola tilted her head slightly. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Out of the car." His tone left no room for hesitation. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy in the crisp air. The jogger passing on the sidewalk slowed, pulling out a phone, pausing mid-stride. Viola exhaled, pushed open the door, and rose to her feet. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of being forced, even now, to prove her right to exist without suspicion. She stood tall. Her presence radiated dignity, though Becker's eyes scanned her as if she were evidence waiting to be catalogued. "This your car?" he asked, circling the Lincoln, voice flat. "It is." "The registration shows a different name." "It's my legal name," she replied evenly. "You sure about that?" He didn't wait for her answer. He pulled the driver's door open, leaned inside, and began rifling through the glove compartment. Paperwork shuffled, the latch of her tote bag clicked open under his hand. No request, no explanation, just assumption wrapped in a badge. "Are you traveling alone?" "I was visiting a friend." "She white?" The question lingered in the frosty air, thick with disdain. Viola's lips pressed into a thin line, but her voice remained calm. "No, Ms. Sanchez, Mexican-American, if you must know." Becker gave a short, derisive snort. "And she lives up here?" Viola turned, her posture unyielding. "Do you always treat grandmothers like criminals in this part of town?" For the first time, something faltered in his expression, a flicker, a hesitation, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, buried beneath a smirk. "You're free to go," he said, as if granting a favor. Just watch yourself." She stepped back toward her Lincoln, pausing with her hand on the door. "I always do," Becker lingered, eyes narrowing before retreating to his cruiser. His engine hummed low as he pulled away, turning the corner with a deliberate slowness. Only when his taillights vanished did Viola sink back into her seat. The Lincoln smelled faintly of lavender and leather. Her hands rested on her lap, steady, though her chest tightened with a fury too familiar to name. She glanced at the back seat. The well-worn copy of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time lay open, pages folded like battle scars. She reached for her phone. Her fingers tapped a number she knew by heart. "Chief Clerk's Office, Supreme Court," came the voice after 2 rings. "Joanne, it's me," Viola said softly. "Justice Martin, are you all right? You were scheduled to arrive an hour ago." "I had an unexpected detour," she replied, her voice even. "But I'm fine. I need you to pull the patrol car logs for Richmond PD, Unit 2217, Officer Troy Becker." There was a beat of silence on the line. "Yes, ma'am. May I ask why?" Viola's eyes locked on her rearview mirror. The empty street reflected back at her, silent, waiting. "Because," she said, her voice low but edged with steel, "it's time a few officers remembered exactly who they serve." She ended the call and adjusted her hat. Outside, the jogger, who had paused earlier, now hurried away, still holding her phone. Viola didn't know yet what had been captured or how far it might travel. She only knew one truth: this story was not finished. And as her Lincoln eased forward, its tires crunching against the frosty pavement, Viola carried with her not just the memory of one more humiliating stop, but the rising certainty that what had been done in silence might not remain silent for long. By the time the sun cleared the sycamores, the clip was already moving on its own. Maya shot it in a rush, thumb cold, breath loud, the camera a little shaky as she slowed her jog. 22 seconds of crisp, ugly clarity. A cruiser idling at the curb, a tall white officer with his palm grazing the curve of his holster, a 72-year-old black woman standing in a burgundy coat beside an old Lincoln, while the officer dug through her glove compartment. There was no yelling, no flailing. The power imbalance didn't need volume. It was in the way the officer's shoulders squared, in the way the woman said, "Officer, you're out of line," with a calm that felt like a hand on a hot stove, steady, impossible. Maya stood on her stoop afterward, sweat chilling on her skin, and watched the clip 3 times. She trimmed the start where her breath sounded panicked and removed the few seconds of her own shoe and frame. Then she typed, in all caps without thinking, "Old black woman harassed for driving in rich neighborhood." She added driving while black and #respect. Grandma hovered for a heartbeat and hit post. TikTok didn't so much lift it as hurl it forward. Someone stitched it with a story about their mother's traffic stop. A metro driver duetted the clip from the break room, shaking his head. A college sophomore added a caption about protocol and probable cause, then paused on the moment the officer flipped the tote bag latch without asking. Within an hour, local pages had it. 2 hours later, a DC organizer with 500,000 followers reposted it with the line, "We don't need to imagine what this looks like, we can see it." The comments split like a fault line. "This is my grandma. He's just doing his job. Protocol doesn't mean search her purse. They always leave out what happened before. She's composed because she's done this 1,000 times." Maya's notifications turned feral. A TV producer from a Richmond station messaged to ask permission to air the clip. A podcaster in Atlanta requested an interview. A man with an American flag avatar called her a liar, then sent 6 more DMs within a minute. She turned her phone face down on the table, then turned it back over because she couldn't not look. She didn't know the woman's name. She knew only what the camera knew. Steady voice, the gloved hand on the doorframe, the book in the back seat like a quiet witness. It felt wrong to leave the woman anonymous and at the same time somehow safer. Maya typed another post, "If you recognize her, protect her privacy first," and pinned it to the top of her profile. By late morning, at Respect Grandma was trending in Virginia. A church page shared the clip next to a photo of ushers lined up in white gloves. The neighborhood Facebook group, which mostly argued about leaf blowers, combusted into a 100-comment thread and then shut down comments entirely. The Richmond Times-Dispatch pushed a breaking banner. Viral video shows officer searching elderly woman's car. RPD says review underway. The police department's first statement arrived on letterhead with careful edges. "We take all public concern seriously. We are reviewing the circumstances surrounding a traffic stop recorded on video. We ask our community for patience and civility while we assess the facts." No names, no times. A whole paragraph that said nothing and asked for quiet. Across town, at the precinct where Officer Troy Becker hung his uniform on the same hook every shift, silence came in another shape. Phones buzzed, laughter warped into something tighter, meaner. In the squad room, a rookie with a fresh high and tight shoved his screen toward Becker. "Yo, you're famous," the rookie said, half giddy, half terrified. Becker stared at his own posture on the screen, the set of his jaw, the moment he leaned into the Lincoln. The clip made everything look clipped, decisive. He preferred it that way. Less context, fewer seams showing. He felt the small spark of defensiveness bloom in his chest, that familiar heat that justified itself. This is a rough city. You can't let your guard down. Circling a wealthy block at dawn is suspicious. I've been at this 15 years. I know the look. "She didn't have her license out," he said to the room as if narrating for a jury only he could see. "Old tags, nervous hands. I followed protocol." No one argued. Two officers avoided eye contact with him entirely, which was its own kind of conversation. His partner, Dana Moss, didn't look up from her desk. She was the one who had flicked her body cam on mid-stop when his stayed off for those first hot seconds. Becker told himself that was habit, not a choice. At lunch, the union rep called. "Don't talk to press," the rep said without preamble. "Don't post. Don't apologize. If anyone asks, you followed procedure as trained. We'll push for the full footage." "What full footage?" Becker asked, even though he knew. They always said there was more to see. Sometimes there was. Sometimes there was simply more of the same. "The department will figure it out," the rep said. "In the meantime, stay off your phone." Becker stayed on his phone. He scrolled the comments until the words blurred, then looked out the window and told himself he didn't care. He didn't know who she was. That truth settled in him like a stone he couldn't swallow and wouldn't spit out. He'd called her ma'am and never once asked her name. On the other end of the city, in a quiet office stacked with casebooks and calendars, Joanne, the chief clerk at the Supreme Court, did what she always did when Justice Viola Martin asked for something. She did it precisely. She pulled the call logs for Richmond PD, flagged the unit number, and printed the relevant page on actual paper. Habit, redundancy, the kind of caution you cultivate around power and secrets. She didn't text. She didn't email. She placed the paper in a folder and waited. No one outside that circle knew any of that. What they knew by afternoon was the clip. A local pastor recorded a vertical frame prayer in his car, eyes wet. "Lord, cover our elders when the state forgets their dignity." A retired white schoolteacher posted an essay about the year she taught in Gilpin Court and the day she realized she clutched her purse around her own students. The algorithm stitched their confessions into a chorus and sent the chorus to more living rooms than any town hall ever could. Cable news found it before dinner. One chyron chose outrage. Elderly woman humiliated in viral stop. Another chose skepticism. Missing context. Viral clip sparks outrage. The footage played in slow motion as anchors filled air with words like discretion and training and tone. The soundbite that traveled furthest wasn't loud. It was Viola's. "You're out of line, officer." Spoken without tremor, it landed with the thud of a gavel. Maya's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to a bright voice ask for permission to rebroadcast, to use her handle on screen, to have her on at 7:12 Eastern. She stared at the ceiling and didn't call back. It was enough that the clip existed. She didn't want to be the story on top of the story. That evening, a second statement from the department slouched onto social feeds, this time from the chief's account. "We are aware of a video circulating involving one of our officers. We ask the public to withhold judgment until all facts are known." The comments filled with facts people already knew. At 9:03 p.m., an email left a federal server in Washington and traveled down the wire. It wasn't a subpoena, not yet. It was a preservation notice, the bureaucratic equivalent of a hand on the door. Do not delete, do not alter. Hold all body cam footage, dispatch logs, GPS pings, dash cam, citations, radio traffic and internal chat messages related to Unit 22117 between 0600 and 0900, date attached. It landed in the city attorney's inbox and in the general counsel's folder at the police department. 2 minutes later, a junior assistant who had never received one of those before took a too long breath and knocked on her boss's door. "Should we tell them?" she asked. Her boss didn't look up. "They'll see it in the morning," but the morning was already forming. In a home in northeast D.C., a woman set her phone face down and checked the lock on the back door, not because she felt afraid, but because habit lives in bones. Viola Martin brewed tea and kept her silence. Reporters had already begun to ping old acquaintances to guess, to speculate. She heard about the guesses secondhand and didn't correct a single one. Quiet, she had learned, can be a megaphone if you let it. In Richmond, Becker's apartment was dim but for the glow of his television. A panel argued over whether the clip was selective. He muted the sound and stared at the crawl of captions anyway. He practiced sentences in his head. She matched the description. The tags were old. She was evasive. The words lined up like dominoes ready to fall into each other if someone gave him a microphone. He brushed a fleck of lint from his uniform on the chair back and told himself he would beat this like he'd beaten other complaints, by outlasting the noise. In a group chat for black lawyers in Virginia, someone posted the clip with 3 words, "We are tired," and the replies piled up into a wall of fire and grief. In a dorm on Broad Street, a freshman pre-law student watched Viola's face and decided, for the 3rd time this semester, not to drop the class that terrified her. Near midnight, Maya refreshed her notifications and saw a new kind of message. "Do you know who she is?" She typed back "no" to 3 different strangers and then put her phone in a drawer. She lay awake for a long time, replaying the sentence, the steadiness in it. "You're out of line, officer." It sounded less like defiance and more like a boundary drawn around her dignity. By morning, the clip had cracked 1 million views. The Richmond station aired it with the volume lowered. A photo of a cruiser parked under an overpass spliced in for B-roll. A national morning show ran it between a cooking segment and a weather map of red arrows. Police stop goes viral. Department promises review. The hosts shook their heads with the well-practiced gravity of people who would never be asked to stand in bare feet by the side of the road at dawn. The police department's media inbox became a floodplain. The city attorney called the chief and said the phrase he hated most: "We need to get ahead of this." The chief asked how. The attorney said words like transparency and community trust and independent review, then looked at the preservation notice again and decided not to say the quiet part out loud. Someone in D.C. was already ahead of them. On a small floor in a federal building where the lights stayed on too late, a civil rights analyst drank cold coffee and scrubbed through the clip frame by frame. She paused when the camera caught the unit number on the cruiser. She paused again at the moment the tote bag clicked open. She typed notes into a template she could fill in her sleep. Potential Fourth Amendment violation, pattern inquiry warranted, request background on officer, hold evidence, assess community impact. Then she opened a new email with a subject line built for urgency that would not show as panic. Richmond PD. Initiate preliminary inquiry. Unit 2217. No one outside a thin ring of people saw that email. What everyone else saw was the clip on loop and the way it made the air in the city feel thinner. In the afternoon, Becker walked into the precinct and the room quieted by a half step, just enough to feel like a bruise. He pretended not to notice. He made coffee that tasted like cardboard and ignored the way Dana's chair didn't turn toward him. He told himself again that procedure would save him, that the department would circle the wagons, that the world would move on. He hadn't yet learned what happens when the world doesn't. He hadn't learned who the woman was. He hadn't learned that sometimes silence in the right hands is not retreat. It's a fuse. Outside, another muralist had started sketching on brick, just an outline now, a woman's profile in calm lines, eyes fixed ahead. People slowed to watch, to take pictures. Someone whispered a name. Someone else said, "No, we don't know yet." The outline held its ground against the afternoon light. By dusk, the department's third statement, shorter, tauter, went live. We are cooperating with state and federal partners to conduct a full review. The words landed with the weight of an admission that something larger had entered the room. And far from the cameras, in the quiet corridor where evidence locks behind steel, a sergeant slid a stack of labeled drives into a cabinet and spun the dial until it clicked. He'd been told, in careful legalese, to hold everything. The door sealed. The noise outside kept rising. And somewhere between 1,000,000 views and 1,000,001, a city took a breath it couldn't quite exhale, already turning toward what would come next. The morning after the third official statement, the Richmond Police Department no longer felt like itself. The walls, once thick with a culture of secrecy and deflection, seemed thinner now, porous to the noise outside. Reporters camped on the steps. Protesters gathered with signs. Officers slipped through side doors rather than face the crowd. The atmosphere inside was worse than tense. It was watchful. Captain Julia Ellis walked briskly down the hallway, her badge clipped slightly crooked, coffee untouched in her hand. She'd been with the department 32 years, long enough to see waves of scandal come and go. But this time felt different. She had taken the late-night call from the Department of Justice herself, a low voice from Washington spelling out in clipped tones, "Preserve everything tied to Officer Troy Becker, effective immediately." Now, as she stepped into her office, Becker was already waiting, his uniform sharp, his eyes flicking nervously between the floor and the door. "Sit," Ellis ordered. He obeyed, stiff-backed in the chair. She closed the door, let the silence stretch long enough to sting, then dropped a folder on the desk between them. "Do you know who you stopped?" she asked flatly. Becker frowned. Some old lady, driving suspiciously. Ellis's jaw tightened. That old lady is Justice Viola Martin, Interim Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The words seemed to hollow the room. Becker blinked, shook his head once, as if trying to dislodge the weight of it. No, that's not possible. Oh, it's very possible, Ellis shot back, and if you'd read her registration instead of rifling through her bag, you would have seen it in black and white. Becker's hands twitched against his knees. He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. That's the problem, Ellis said. You didn't care to know. You treated her like a suspect because you thought no one would ever question you. The silence that followed pressed on his chest until he could barely breathe. He tried to summon his defense, the same tired words that had carried him through complaints before. She was circling the block, nervous hands. It matched the profile. Profile? Ellis cut in, voice sharp as glass. What profile? Driving while black? Being 72 in a Lincoln? Becker's face flushed crimson. He stared at the folder as if it might burst into flames. Ellis leaned closer. You didn't just humiliate a grandmother on the side of the road. You embarrassed this department on a national scale, and you handed the DOJ the hammer to tear our policies apart. He swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. What's going to happen? Ellis sat back, eyes unblinking. Best case? You lose your badge. Worst case? Federal civil rights violations. Either way, your career is over. Becker felt the air leave him, like a balloon punctured without warning. The room tilted, the years of quiet arrogance, of unchecked authority, collapsing all at once. Across the hall, Internal Affairs set up camp in Conference Room B, the glass-walled one by the vending machines. That was deliberate. They wanted every officer in the building to see what was happening, to watch Becker's downfall in real time. Detective Briggs, a man with the kind of calm that made others sweat, queued up the dashcam footage. They'd watched it a dozen times already, but now it carried a different weight. Viola's voice, firm and unshaken. You're out of line, officer. I suggest you stop before this becomes a legal issue. Echoed through the speakers like scripture. Briggs dropped the citation Becker had filed onto the table. According to your report, she was showing signs of mental instability, erratic speech, and resistance to commands. Is that correct? Becker nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes. Briggs pressed play again, the room filled with Viola's steady, regal cadence. No erratic speech, no raised voice, no defiance, just authority. Funny, Briggs said, because what I hear is composure. What I see is a woman who obeyed every command. The GPS shows she maintained a steady speed. Every traffic sign obeyed. So, tell me, Officer Becker, where exactly is the instability? Becker's throat tightened. I was concerned for her safety. She kept talking about legality like she owned the law. Ellis's voice cut through the air, low and lethal. She does own the law. Briggs opened another folder, slid a photograph across the table. Viola Martin in judicial robes, a biography sheet, a federal memo stamped with her interim appointment date. Becker stared at it. His breath caught. His mouth opened, but no words followed. The trembling in his hands betrayed him. She is the highest legal authority in this country, Briggs said, and you had her standing by her car at 7 in the morning while you searched her trunk without cause. The silence in the room was heavier than any rebuke. Outside the glass wall, officers pretended not to stare, but their eyes lingered. The rumor had already spread. The woman in the viral video was Justice Martin. Now, the confirmation hung in the air like smoke. Becker slumped in his chair. For the first time in his career, words, his favorite weapon, abandoned him. He saw not just the end of his badge, but the unraveling of the wall that had always protected him. "What happens now?" he whispered. Ellis didn't answer. She didn't have to. The suits from Washington were already in the hallway, waiting. The subpoenas were signed. The cameras outside were multiplying. For 15 years, Becker had believed the system bent to him, that procedure would always shield him, that silence would always cover his missteps. Now he sat at the center of a storm he couldn't outtalk or outlast. And for the first time, he understood the cost of not looking twice. The sun pressed down heavy on Richmond the morning of the hearing. It wasn't just heat, it was the tension in the air, an electricity that made shirts cling and voices carry sharper than usual. The courthouse steps were alive with bodies, students holding handmade signs, mothers clutching their children's hands, pastors in dark suits, local reporters jockeying for position alongside national media vans. The city had tried to keep this quiet, tried to pass it off as an internal review, a closed-door proceeding. But the people wouldn't allow it. Civil rights groups demanded transparency. Community leaders insisted the doors be opened. The council, overwhelmed, had agreed. Now, instead of a backroom procedure, Richmond faced a public hearing on racial profiling and police conduct. And at the center of it all was not the mayor, not the chief of police, not a prosecutor, but Justice Viola Martin. She did not arrive with sirens or motorcades. She walked up the courthouse steps in silence, her navy robe flowing around her ankles, her wide-brimmed hat shading her steady gaze. She had chosen not the Supreme Court's formal black, but the robe she once wore as a circuit judge in Virginia. It was her way of saying, "I am here not as a symbol in Washington, but as a daughter of this soil." Reporters shouted questions, but she gave them nothing. Inside, the chamber was already packed. Folding chairs lined the back wall. People stood in the aisles, pressed shoulder to shoulder. The atmosphere pulsed with expectation. At the long wooden table reserved for questioned officers sat Troy Becker. His lawyer, polished and cold, leaned in to whisper in his ear, but Becker's shoulders sagged. He looked smaller than he ever had, no longer the confident officer with his hand resting on a holster, but a man swallowed whole by the weight of his own choices. Around the room, no one looked at him with solidarity. He was isolated, adrift. Viola took her place at the elevated seat at the head of the chamber. She adjusted her glasses slowly, deliberately, letting the silence deepen until the crowd itself seemed to breathe with her. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice low but commanding. "This session is not a criminal trial. It is an inquiry into the procedures, assumptions, and culture that underpin policing in our community. Justice is not confined to indictments. It begins in the questions we ask and in the silences we allow." She did not look at Becker, not yet. The council opened the floor to community statements first. One by one, voices filled the chamber. A pastor spoke of how his teenage sons had been stopped 5 times this year alone. A schoolteacher described watching her students flinch whenever a patrol car drove by. A small business owner recounted being searched on his own property. The data followed, charts showing stop and frisk rates, arrest demographics, reports of force disproportionately used against black residents. 3 hours of testimony passed like a tide rising higher, stronger, undeniable. And then it was time. "Officer Becker," Viola said at last, her eyes turning to him. He shifted, his chair groaning under the movement. His lawyer leaned in again, but Viola raised one gloved hand gently. "I am not here to debate with you, sir. I am not interested in accusations or justifications." She folded her hands. I am here to ask you 3 questions." The chamber held its breath. Becker swallowed his Adam's apple jerkin. "Yes, Your Honor." Viola's first question landed like a stone breaking still water. "Have you ever felt afraid when someone in uniform approached you?" Becker blinked. "No, ma'am, not once. I follow the law." Her gaze didn't move. "Or perhaps because the person in uniform looked like you." Becker faltered. The silence that followed was louder than any protest. Viola's second question came before the room could exhale. "Have you ever imagined that the person you stop, interrogate, handcuff could be your mother?" His face twitched. "My mother's not like that." "Not like what?" Viola's voice stayed calm. She doesn't draw attention. She doesn't drive where she doesn't belong." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Someone gasped. A woman stood up and left, shaking her head in disgust. Viola didn't flinch. "So you decide who belongs? By address? By appearance?" Becker said nothing. His silence was louder than any answer. Her final question fell soft but heavy, like thunder wrapped in a whisper. "Do you believe justice should depend on the color of someone's skin or on the truth?" Becker opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. But no answer came. The silence expanded until it filled every corner of the chamber. Viola let it sit, let it cut deeper than any lecture could. Then she leaned back in her chair. "That will be all," she said. "No outrage, no condemnation, just questions. Questions that echoed louder than verdicts. When the hearing adjourned, the crowd poured outside into the punishing sun. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "Justice Martin, why didn't you press charges? Are you seeking Becker's dismissal? Is the DOJ stepping in?" Viola paused on the courthouse steps. The cameras clicked like a hailstorm. She adjusted her hat, eyes steady. "This hearing was not about vengeance," she said. "It was about vision. If we want to change the system, we don't begin by punishing one man. We begin by questioning the system that made him feel untouchable." She turned away, walking slowly down the steps toward her car. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in protest, all in noise. In the throng, half hidden behind a camera crew, stood Dana Moss, Becker's longtime partner. She wasn't in uniform. She hadn't come to defend him. She stood there, listening, realizing, perhaps for the first time in her career, that justice wasn't about procedure. It was about proximity. And today, justice had a face, a name, and a voice that refused to be silent. The letter came in an unmarked white envelope, delivered like any other piece of mail. No seal, no emblem, no weight of ceremony, just a folded sheet of cream paper and a few lines of black ink. Effective immediately, Officer Troy Becker is terminated from the Richmond Police Department. He is hereby prohibited from serving in any law enforcement capacity within the state of Virginia. There was no appeal process, no polite language softening the edges, just the finality of it. Becker sat in his dim apartment, the blinds half closed against the summer sun. His uniform still hung on the back of a chair, untouched since the hearing. His badge lay face down on the coffee table, next to a sweating bottle of bourbon. He read the letter again and again, each word striking like a gavel. He had thought he could outlast this storm the way others had. He'd seen colleagues survive shootings, planted evidence, falsified reports. There was always an excuse, always a wall of silence to lean against. But this time the wall cracked. Because this time the woman he stopped wasn't just another grandmother to dismiss. She was the law itself. And her silence had cut sharper than any lawyer's argument. Across town, Captain Julia Ellis stood by her office window. The city buzzed below, reporters still crowding the steps, protesters chanting in the square. She had signed Becker's termination herself. 32 years of service behind her, she knew the truth too well. The problem wasn't one officer. It was systemic. Every rookie she trained, every complaint she brushed off as overreaction, every quiet night she told herself it wasn't her fight that had led here. She left an envelope on the city manager's desk before going home. Inside was her resignation letter. Just 2 sentences. I failed. And that failure was systemic. No press conference followed, no cameras, just absence, like a door closing quietly. But outside the walls of the precinct, something new was opening. The Richmond City Council reconvened weeks later in a packed chamber. This time there was no resistance, no delay. They voted unanimously to create an independent police reform advisory committee. Its members stood shoulder to shoulder on the courthouse lawn. Pastors, public defenders, mental health professionals, teachers, activists. At the center was Aria Carter, a young black lawyer with her hair pulled tightly back, a red folder clutched in her hand. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady despite the cameras. "My name is Aria Carter," she began. "I was once told I'd never change anything. Today, we begin." On the second floor of the courthouse, behind a half-open window, Viola Martin watched. She was not part of the committee. She had never asked to be. She didn't need to stand on stage. It was enough to see new voices rise, enough to witness a system take its first fragile step toward change. That evening, at her home in Washington, she brewed tea and sat on the back porch beneath the magnolia tree her late husband had planted decades ago. The kettle steamed beside her. The air was thick with jasmine and fading heat. On the small tray rested another envelope. This one hand-addressed, the letters a little uneven, written in purple ink. She unfolded the lined paper and read slowly. "Dear Grandma Viola, I watched what you did. Mama said you were brave. I think you were more than brave. You made me feel proud to be black. Love, Tasha, age 12, Atlanta, Georgia." Viola's hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. Not from fear, not from rage, but from the deep knowledge that change does not come from headlines alone. It comes from small voices, from young hearts, from kitchen tables where dignity is passed down like heirlooms. She sipped her tea, eyes on the horizon. Justice, she knew, was not an ending. It was a beginning. And somewhere down the line, whether in a courtroom, a classroom, or a city hall, that 12-year-old girl would remember the day she wrote to an old woman who refused to bow, refused to be erased, and she would rise. The fight was not over, but Viola had lived long enough to know real justice does not come in thunder. It comes in echoes, and those echoes were only just beginning. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you never miss the next one.